Hello, this is Mrs. Politsky, and these are notes for Module 17, talking a little bit about the psychodynamic and humanistic perspectives on personality. As we go along, make sure you fill in the information that you need. So let's go ahead and start a little bit. We're going to talk about Sigmund Freud, who's probably one of the best known psychologists that has ever been. Freud believed that your personality is really shaped from events that happen in your childhood. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of his big concepts, starting with free association, which is something that Freud would make his patients do when they would come in to visit. They would lay down on the sofa and they would basically be told to say the first thing that came to mind, regardless of how trivial or embarrassing. Freud also believed that our human mind is a lot like an iceberg, with three different levels. Consciousness, which is the part of the iceberg above the level, which is whatever we're aware of at any given moment. At the waterline, we would have pre-consciousness. This is like when we daydream. You can easily slip in and out of awareness. And then finally, unconsciousness, which would be the bulk of an iceberg, anything that's submerged. This would be all of our unacceptable thoughts, wishes, feelings, or memories. Okay, Freud believed that there were little windows into that unconscious mind, and a Freudian slip would be one of those. Saying one thing and maybe meaning another was one way to kind of get an idea of what's going on in that unconscious mind. Freud also believed that our personality is divided into three parts, the id, the superego, and the ego. And if you've ever seen cartoons where they have the little devil and the little angel on the shoulders, this is kind of alluding to that. The id is the part of our personality that is always out there trying to satisfy itself, either in a sexual way or an aggressive drive. And it is fueled by what is known as the pleasure principle, this idea that it has to have immediate gratification or else. On the opposite side is the superego, which is pretty much all of our, morals and our consciousness. This develops basically when we're a child, when our parents and peers and even teachers kind of criticize us. Superego is always working for perfection. And in between that, we have the reality, what is known as the ego. And this is really us. It's trying to mediate the demands of both the id and the superego, and it operates on what is known as the reality principle, which is basically trying to meet the needs. Again, uh, id, ego, superego, kind of in here as well if you're talking about the conscious, preconsciousness, and unconscious mind. That's the iceberg analogy. All right. Our ego has to be protected. And hence, we have these things called defense mechanisms or ego defense mechanisms. Freud believed that these were things that we use to protect our ego by reducing anxiety, by unconsciously distorting reality. And there are several of these. Repression, okay, that's one way we can banish anxiety, trying to kind of store it into the back of our mind. So if there's something that we know is unacceptable, we don't think about it, we purposely put it away. Regression is basically retreating into a more comfortable, maybe infantile stage of life. So it may mean that you act childish when you don't get your way. Denial, refusing to admit something unpleasant is happening. So somebody may tell you some bad news and you just can't accept that. That can be denial. Reaction formation. This is reversing an unacceptable impulse, causing an anxious person to express the opposite of the anxiety provoking unconscious feelings. So you might be mad, but you might put on kind of the fake face and try to be all happy when you're really just really livid. Projection, disguising threatening feelings of guilty anxiety by attributing the problem to other people. So, not taking the blame for that. Rationalization, basically displacing real anxiety, provoking explanations and replacing them with something that's a little more comfortable as far as the justification. So, a lot of times it's like, trying to explain away some bad event, maybe in some kind of scientific terms. And then finally, displacement. The shift of an unacceptable impulse into one that's a little less threatening or more acceptable. So, you know, you are really mad at your boss, but you know that it's unacceptable to act on that. So you take it home and you yell maybe at your siblings or your spouse, or um, you yell at your family pet. Okay, opposed to yelling at who really made you mad. All right. The last thing we're going to talk about is Freud's psychosexual stages of development. And I mentioned before, Freud believed that personality is shaped really in the first few years of life. And so he kind of came up with this idea of psychosexual development, which is based on some different issues that involve the id. The id's pleasure seeking energies are focused on different parts of the body as we grow up. And if there would ever be a problem, there would be what we would call a fixation. So the first stage is the oral stage, basically from birth to about 18 months. This is when a child is nursing. And pleasure comes from things around the mouth, like chewing and biting and sucking. It's kind of dealing with the conflict of weaning. And what might happen is, like as a child, you might have a child that is into chewing and gnawing on different things, perhaps maybe biting other kids. Okay, if the fixation continues beyond 18 months, we might see an individual that has some other issues. So, like an adult with like an oral fixation might have a problem with smoking or chewing tobacco. The anal stage, which is from about 18 months to about 3 years, roughly the time period where the conflict would be potty training. And gratification comes from having control over your bodily functions, like your bowel movements and bladder functions. Okay, an individual who kind of gets fixated in this stage might get a little stingy. So, like, they can have kind of a label known as anal retentive, where they are absolute perfectionists. Everything has to be clean, tidy, and in its place. And if something gets out of place, then it totally devastates their day. The next stage is the phallic stage. This lasts from about age 3 to about 6 years of age, and the pleasure zones are shifting towards the genitals. And one of the big issues that comes out of this is a term that kind of goes back to ancient Greece, the Oedipus complex. Boys view their fathers as competition for their mother's attention, and thus they have this feeling of hatred, fear, and jealousy towards their fathers. This is all coming from um, the Greek tragedy Oedipus Rex, which was written by a guy named Sophocles in ancient Greece. Women or girls can have what is called an Electra complex, where a girl views her mother as competition for her father's attention. And so, what you might see with children who are kind of in this stage is the concept of mama's little boy and daddy's little girl. Okay, if the child moves beyond that, then we get into the period known as latency. And this goes from about age 6 through puberty. And typically, this is what happens. A little boy will kind of buddy up with his dad, and a little girl will buddy up with her mom. And they learn a lot about their gender identity during this period of time. Once a child or an individual hits puberty, then we get into the gentle stage. And this basically is when an individual starts experiencing sexual feelings towards people of the opposite sex. All right, I hope you got everything that you need for today. Thanks.